Oh, we got a fun one today, guys. I hope that you guys are going to enjoy this Bible study walkthrough. If you want to learn how to read and study the Bible, you've come to the right place. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 7. I'm going to give you some tips and techniques along the way. But before I do, if you didn't know this, we have a completely free 40-day Bible study program, a 27-day and 11-day linked in the description below and online at abovereproachministry.com. Go check it out. Verse 7 of Hebrews chapter 1. We have, let me just give you context, because when you read the Bible, you want what's called context, okay? You want to know where this verse is in relation to everything else around it, because this is a part of a literary unit and a main idea. So we have the author of Hebrews making the argument, or I guess giving evidence in the Hebrew scriptures for why Jesus is better than angels. So he's given us at least three Old Testament references to make it clear that Jesus is the Son. So in verse 7, we have the Father. It says, of the angels, he says, now this is the Father. When you read the Bible, you want to know who's speaking, right? So we have here, I don't know, let's use yellow to represent the Father. Make that out to be God is speaking. He says, who's he talking to? He's talking to the angels. This is a quotation from, I believe, the Psalms. It could be wrong. It's been a while. Don't quote me on that. Let me know in the comments how I'm wrong, because I know I'm wrong. So let me know what this quotation's from. But either way, the author quotes, he says, he makes his angels winds and his ministers a flame of fire. Right? Now that sounds odd, but look at the description. Winds and fire. That's who the angels are as ministers, right? So this is the Father speaking about, not directly to, like I thought, but about the angels. The Father speaking to them, about them. He makes the angels winds, ministers a flame of fire. What we want to think about is, what in the world does it mean for the angels to be ministers, or rather winds and a flame of fire? Now, there's a number of ways when you read the Bible, you can start to make sense of these confusing ideas that might be foreign to you, right? If you're not a longtime student of the Bible, this goes right over your head. But immediately what comes to mind for me, and this is what you do when you read the Bible, you want to make sense of ideas that are confusing to you. What does wind have to do with fire? Where else have I seen wind and fire in the Old Testament? I've seen a lot of wind and fire when it comes to God making himself known and his presence. But what we see here, and again, this is not us definitively saying that the angels relate to any picture of wind or fire. This is just us thinking through the Bible, going, where else have I seen wind or fire emphasized as it relates to the spiritual? How might the angels be ministers, or a flame of fire and winds? And part of it has to do with this word right here, ministers. What does it mean to minister to someone? Well, it means you're actually sent out on their behalf. This is the angels who are sent to care for, serve, help, encourage, uplift, to provide for. These are ministers that God has sent out and dispatched, and they're referred to as a flame of fire and winds. So whatever the winds are, them being winds or them being fire, it relates to them being made that by God, number one. So this is how you start to make sense of ideas that really just go over your head. Them being winds and fire, it's what God makes them to be. He's ordained for them. He's purposed for angels to be this. Number two, it has to do with them ministering to someone, right? What we'll see later is that angels are ministers to human beings, to image bearers of God. So, that's where you can start to make sense of what it means that they're winds and fire. You can also run to a Greek lexicon and look up what word is being used here in the Greek, what it means. maybe the surrounding context will give us clarity on what it means that they're fire and winds. And so this is an Old Testament quotation, right? So my encouragement to you is when you read the Bible and you see a biblical author reference somewhere else in the scriptures, go to that reference. Go to that passage, read it in context, and you actually might get clarity on, based on the surrounding context, that might help you make sense of what it means that angels are a flame of fire and winds. And I'm not going to tell you my initial thoughts because my job isn't necessarily today to tell you to interpret and unpack and exegete a text. I just want to show you how to do that, right? So this is how you begin to. You ask questions, you make connections, you go back to other passages that might use the same word for winds and fire in the New Testament, see how they relate. I can think of a rushing wind coming in at the day of Pentecost, right? So maybe the ministering spirits called angels somehow relate to that idea of the Spirit of God rushing in like a wind, that kind of idea, right? So you start to think through this. This is what it means to meditate on Scripture, is you're thinking through, you're asking God, you're making connections, you're really sitting with a text and chewing on it, right? So now what we need to think about is why this random statement, at least it seems random, but it's not. This is the fourth quotation from the Old Testament making the main point that Jesus is indeed better than angels. So you have to ask yourself, again, connect a verse to the main point of the passage it fits in. So if the main point of this section is to prove that Jesus is better than angels, when you read the Bible, ask yourself, well, how does this passage connect to the main idea that I've seen repeated in this section of Scripture? And usually the main idea will be clear, or, I guess will be clarified by the repeating words and repeating ideas you see, and almost a progressive line of thought. And so what we see here is this verse somehow connects to Jesus being better than angels. What's the argumentation? Let me know in the comments what you think. Verse 8, but. Now, as you guys already know, one of my favorite conjunctions to think through and highlight is the word but, because this notes a transition, but also in this context, it's a contrast. Okay? But of the Son, the Father says, He, right? So what we have here is the Father in two different instances speaking to two different audiences. Here, he's talking about angels. Here, he's talking about the Son, right? So we have the angels. I'm not going to make it any more ridiculous, but what I'll do is I'll circle the Son in purple, and I'll circle the Son in angels to note that, and this is honestly what I do in my Bible, to note that the angels and the Son are being contrasted because of this word but. It's telling us that, yeah, the Father says that about the angels, but watch what he says about the Son. It's different. He says, your throne, O God. Interesting. This is the Father speaking of the Son. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. Now, I highlight that in yellow because God is speaking here, the Father, right? But God is being referenced here or talked to by the Father, and we know that it's the Son, right? Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. So what we have here is, pay attention to the word but. When you read the Bible, go, there's a contrast being drawn here. So it's my job to figure out what is the difference between what the Father says about the angels and what he says about the Son. Let's go through that. Let's think through this together as good Bible students. Number one, when he talks about the angels, he talks about their service, what they are, what they're made to be. When he talks about the Son, he talks about his throne, his rule, his reign, his authority, and his scepter. So what we have is a difference in what's being addressed about each of these two different audiences. For the angels, the Father speaks of their service, right? Of the Son, he speaks of his, you can put rule, you can put throne, you can put dominion. I want to put, I can't think of the word, kingship, right? That's a very strong contrast. When the Father speaks of the angels, it's about their ministry. When the Father speaks of the Son, it's about his rule. So it's on us to think about how those two ideas relate in this context, right? Because the author of Hebrews is choosing these specific quotations from the Old Testament on purpose, not just to make one point, but often there's subcategories of points. So when you read the Bible and you come across an Old Testament passage or any reference passage being referenced by a biblical author, sorry, I can't speak, here's what you do, okay? I lost my train of thought. Come back. When you read and you find a reference, you want to think about, okay, not just the main point the author is making with that reference, but any other subpoints, okay? Because it's not always that there's just one main point. Sometimes there's other subpoints being made that reinforce the main point. So there's a contrast between the Son and the angels. Your throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. So notice, let's highlight this in orange. The throne, the scepter being addressed of the Son, who is referred to as God. So this is really God's scepter. And I'm gonna draw arrows for the scepter and the throne back to God because it centralizes around him. But notice the descriptive words used of the throne. The throne of God is forever and ever, right? So what I want to think about is, since the Son and the angels are being contrasted, something about the eternal, if I can spell, eternal nature of his throne is being contrasted with the angels. So I want you to think through this. This is why we study and we meditate. If the Son's throne is being highlighted, and specifically the fact that his throne is forever and ever, no limit, then somehow that's going to be contrasted with something about the angels, right? Angels, we know, are made by God to be something for a purpose. Angels have a beginning. They're not eternally existent, right? Not like God. They don't have that attribute. When you read the rest of Scripture, you find that out, okay? So I'm not just pulling that out of thin air. So what I want to think about is the forever and ever nature to the throne of God being contrasted with the angels are created, essentially, and the Son continues forever and ever. Now, there's angels, as we see with fallen angels, those who reject God and turn away from him in rebellion, they end up being destroyed. They actually can cease to exist, whereas it doesn't seem like the Son and his throne can. The scepter of uprightness is the scepter of your kingdom. I forgot to highlight this. What I did in the orange is I highlighted anything having to do with a kingdom, a ruling. We have a throne, a scepter, a kingdom. So 4 times, I want you to think about this. In one verse, there seems to be a repeating 4 times the idea of 4 times the idea of, I guess, kingship is pointed out. So when you read the Bible and you notice, not just repeating words, okay, but synonymous words, a repeating idea. These words have something in common. They have to do with kingship. They have to do with, kingdom, a scepter and a throne. So obviously, because I see that idea put forth 4 times in one verse, that tells me the main point of this verse has much to do with the kingdom and the throne of this one who is referred to as God by the Father. Okay? So the kingdom, the throne, the kingship of the Son is in focus here, contrasted with the ministry of the angels in focus there. In other words, they're dispatched as servants of God Whereas Jesus here, the Son, is the one sitting on the throne doing the dispatching. The way I come to that conclusion is I think about the angels are being contrasted with the Son, right? He's better. Not that they're evil, he's just better. He has a kingdom, they're sent out. Well, what I can think about is, well, who's the one sending them out? The one who sits on the throne. Well, the one sitting on the throne here is the Son. So how do we know that Jesus is better? It's the one that he's sitting on the throne, sending them out to be ministers, making them winds and fire, right? So this makes Jesus way better. Something else to think about, okay, is why the word uprightness is used. Of all the ways you could characterize and explain the way the Son rules with justice, with righteousness, he uses the word uprightness. So that just sticks out to me when you read the Bible and you go, that word sticks out because it seems like the author could have gotten away with not using it. He added that intentionally. I want to go to a Greek lexicon. I want to see how that word is used in other contexts. I want to see, maybe based on what I've read in the last 7 verses of Hebrews, is there anything else I've seen relating to uprightness? Is there anything else I've seen relating to a kingdom or a throne, right? And I'll tell you right now, we've seen it, just not explicitly. It's where Jesus sits down at the right hand of the majesty, that being God sitting on his throne on high, meaning in the highest place. In the highest of places, the Father is sitting on his throne and the Son is sitting next to him, right? And that, again, when you see an idea repeating in one verse, that signals to me that I might have seen that idea already in previous verses. And I might also see that idea in later verses, and I should pay attention to that. In other words, I should almost have this idea of a throne and a kingdom and a scepter at the front of my brain as I read the following verses. I want to be looking for that, right? This is what we do when we read the Bible. We take the hint and we go, this is a repeating idea. Maybe I should pay attention to anywhere else I've seen that in the previous verses or in the following verses. And maybe that surrounding usage of this idea will bring clarity to what's being said here, right? So ask questions when you read the Bible. What does uprightness emphasize about his kingdom or his reign? What does that emphasize in particular? The Bible is meant to be meditation literature. So when you read the Bible, meditate, think through. That's what I hope you take away from today. I hope this Bible study walkthrough was helpful. I'll see you guys in the next Bible study walkthrough where we continue to learn how to study and read the Bible.